Imagine a stealthy, multi-million-dollar submarine slipping quietly into a foreign harbor.
Right.
Or, a heavily armed missile corvette dropping anchor just off the coast of a critical regional partner. The radar arrays are spinning, the crew is at full attention, and all the weapon systems are fully operational.
But the twist is, they aren't actually there to start a war.
Exactly. They're there to, well, deliver a diplomatic invitation. Today, we're doing a deep dive into how India is essentially weaponizing peace.
Yeah, it's a completely fascinating shift.
It really is. We're analyzing a stack of strategic assessments detailing India's massive expansion of what they call defense diplomacy. And the mission for you as you listen today is to understand how a rising global power actually projects influence and secures its borders without firing a single shot in anger.
Right, because it's a total inversion of traditional power dynamics. I mean, it redefines how we measure national influence.
Because normally when we think of diplomacy, we picture, civilian ambassadors in nice suits navigating complex negotiations in a boardroom.
Exactly. But what we are looking at today is the deliberate, non-kinetic employment of military capabilities to achieve those same foreign policy goals.
Non-kinetic just meaning like not shooting at anyone.
Right. Peaceful operations. And this isn't just a supplementary side tactic for India anymore. It's really becoming the tip of the spear.
How so?
Well, they're leveraging the sheer logistical reality of their naval and aerospace platforms to build alliances, deter adversaries, and physically shape the strategic environment across the Indo-Pacific.
And the map of this strategy is just expanding at a breakneck pace. Like, if you look at where they are deploying these assets, we aren't just talking about India patrolling its immediate backyard in the Indian Ocean anymore.
Right, and the footprint is much larger now.
Yeah, it stretches from the Mediterranean Sea all the way down through the Gulf of Guinea and Africa, and then aggressively eastward into the broader Asia-Pacific.
Which is a massive, massive theater of operations.
Yeah, it's huge. But a geographic expansion that aggressive, I mean, it doesn't just happen because a Navy wants to, stretch its sea legs. There has to be a specific catalyst.
There absolutely is. And it's the defining geopolitical friction of the 21st century.
You're talking about China.
Yes. India's intensified regional defense diplomacy is a direct, calculated response to China's growing assertiveness.
Especially in highly contested areas like
Yeah.
the South China Sea, right?
Exactly. India is watching this balance of power shift in real time.
Mm.
And they realize that traditional statecraft, like simply issuing statements of concern or signing a memorandum of understanding, it's just no longer sufficient to secure their interests.
Okay, let's unpack that assumption a bit, because I think a lot of people would argue that traditional statecraft is exactly what you need to avoid escalating a tense situation.
It's a fair point.
Right. Like, if India sees a shifting dynamic with China, why isn't it enough to just send a highly skilled diplomatic corps to Beijing or, to allied capitals like Manila and Jakarta to hash out structural agreements? Why risk the optics of sending warships and attack submarines thousands of miles from home? Doesn't that just look like you are actively looking for a fight?
I mean, it might look like that to an outsider, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's about preventing a fight.
How does bringing a warship prevent a fight?
Because in international relations, particularly in contested maritime routes, presence is policy.
Presence is policy.
Yeah.
Okay, explain that.
Sure. So a civilian diplomat can sign a security treaty, and obviously that is vital. But paper treaties only represent a stated intention.
Right. They're just words on a page.
Exactly. They don't prove you actually have the physical capability to back up your promises if a crisis suddenly erupts.
Ah, I see.
So when India sends a frontline naval vessel to a partner's port, they are demonstrating a tangible, undeniable capability. They're proving they have the engineering sophistication, the supply chains, and most importantly, the political resolve to operate in that space.
So it transforms a theoretical alliance into a physical reality. It's the difference between telling an ally, hey, we will support you if things get bad, and actually standing shoulder to shoulder with them in the exact environment where things might go bad.
Yes, and that changes the entire psychological calculus for everyone involved, friends and adversaries alike.
Okay, so that brings us to the operational reality of how this is actually being executed on the ground, or, well, on the water. And the sheer volume of this outreach in the source text is staggering.
The numbers are pretty wild.
In 2023 alone, India conducted 75 combined military exercises with partner countries.
Yeah, 75 in a single year.
That is just mind-boggling to me. And these aren't just simple bilateral one-on-one exercises either, right?
No, they're coordinating trilateral and massive multilateral exercises.
Which, if you actually think about the logistics of that, it's a nightmare. You were trying to integrate different navies that speak entirely different languages.
They use different encryption protocols, different tactical doctrines.
Exactly. Just managing the communication network so that an Indian destroyer can seamlessly share radar data with, like, a French or Australian frigate that requires an incredible amount of back-end engineering.
It does, and honestly, that logistical friction is exactly the point of doing them.
What do you mean?
Well, you don't run 75 complex exercises just for a nice photo opportunity. You run them to force your military to figure out all those encryption mismatches and, fuel nozzle incompatibilities during peacetime.
Oh, so you work out the bugs before a real war starts.
Right, so if a coordinated response is ever actually required, the interoperability is already hardwired.
That makes a lot of sense. And what's particularly notable within this whole maritime focus is the deployment of their submarines to places like Australia, Indonesia, and Singapore.
Let's talk about the submarines, because that is a completely different tier of diplomacy.
It really feels like it. I mean, a submarine's entire tactical value is built on its secrecy, right?
100%.
The acoustic signature of a like the specific unique sound its propeller makes in underwater, that is one of a nation's most closely guarded state secrets.
Oh, absolutely.
So pulling one of those highly classified assets into a foreign port feels like an unprecedented level of vulnerability.
It is a massive display of strategic trust. But it's not blind vulnerability. It's a very calculated signal.
Okay, what's the signal?
When New Delhi sends a submarine into a partner's harbor, they are explicitly saying, "We trust your security apparatus enough to bring our most sensitive technology into your sovereign waters."
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge compliment to the host nation.
But simultaneously, they are sending a very clear message to their adversaries.
Because it proves they can get there in the first place.
Exactly. Operating a submarine effectively across the ocean requires highly advanced acoustic mapping, satellite communication, incredible endurance. It proves to the entire region that India's underwater reach is long, it's silent, and it's highly capable.
So it's establishing unassailable credibility. And that credibility doesn't just come from staged exercises either. It comes from real-world execution.
Right, the real-world action is where it gets undeniable.
And the most striking evidence of this in our deep dive today is India's humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or HADR, operations, specifically their anti-piracy missions in West Asian waterways.
This is a perfect example.
Yeah, the Indian Navy has actively stepped in to free hijacked commercial ships and rescue the hostages of other nations from Somalian and Houthi pirates.
Which is where defense diplomacy transitions from, theoretical posturing to undeniable global utility.
But I want to challenge the strategic value of this for a second, because I totally understand rescuing your own citizens. That is the fundamental duty of a state.
Right.
But India is spending millions of dollars and risking its own sailors to rescue the crews of entirely different nations. Is that just a PR move? Like, how does rescuing a commercial freighter from a completely different country actually translate into hard diplomatic leverage for New Delhi?
It is so much deeper than public relations. It's really about establishing India as a net security provider.
A net security provider.
Right. Think about it. When a hijacking occurs in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden, it creates an immediate security vacuum that threatens the entire global supply chain.
Everybody's economy suffers.
Exactly. So by stepping into that vacuum unprompted to protect the economic interests of the international community, India proves its absolute reliability.
They show up when everyone else is panicking.
Yes. It demonstrates that its military is a stabilizing force, not just a defensive one for its own borders.
I see. So it's not like a transactional favor where, a rescued nation suddenly owes India a debt.
No.
It's about proving that when the whole system breaks down, India has the capacity and the sheer will to fix it.
Yes, and the downstream effect of that is really profound.
How so?
Well, when those rescued crews return home, and global shipping conglomerates realize their cargo is safer because of the Indian Navy, it builds immense institutional trust. And that trust is the foundational bedrock for future trade agreements, intelligence sharing, strategic alignment.
Okay, so India proves it can protect international waters, which is great, but it's kind of reactionary, right? You wait for a crisis and then you solve it.
That's true.
But to create permanent stability and really permanent alliances, you can't just keep rescuing a partner's ships forever. You have to fundamentally build up their own capabilities.
Which brings us to the next phase of the strategy.
Right, which transitions us from maritime operations to actual hardware. India isn't just showing up anymore. They're essentially treating advanced weaponry as diplomatic handshakes.
And this represents a real watershed moment in their foreign policy.
Because exporting complex weapon systems fundamentally alters the whole geopolitical landscape.
It absolutely does.
The prime example in our sources here is the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile. For the first time, India agreed to sell 3 batteries of the BrahMos to the Philippine Marine Corps.
Which is huge.
It's massive. Now, a supersonic cruise missile is a highly sophisticated piece of technology. It flies incredibly fast, making it extremely difficult to intercept.
Right.
Putting that capability into the hands of the Philippines right on the edge of the South China Sea completely changes the tactical calculus for anyone operating in those waters.
It changes everything. And it's really crucial to understand the origin of the BrahMos missile, too.
Oh, right, the Russian connection.
Yeah. It is a joint venture weapons system developed between India and Russia. Keep that in mind because it creates a really fascinating complication later on in our analysis.
Definitely. But strategically, exporting a weapon of that caliber to Manila is just a massive power play.
Unquestionably.
And their ambitions don't stop with the Philippines. Look at their strategy with Vietnam.
Vietnam is a very interesting case study here.
Yeah. India extended a $100 million credit line for Vietnam to procure 12 patrol vessels. They are in talks for BrahMos sales, but the maneuver that really demands analysis happened in June 2023.
The INS Kirpan.
Yes. India didn't just sell hardware to Vietnam, they presented a fully functional missile corvette, the INS Kirpan, as a gift to the Vietnamese Navy.
Transferring an active duty warship is a monumental strategic commitment.
Right, but let's be realistic about the cost for a second.
Okay.
A missile corvette is an incredibly expensive asset. Gifting it away sounds like an immense burden on the Indian taxpayer. I mean, is there a hard calculated return on investment here, or is this just an overpriced geopolitical ribbon-cutting ceremony?
It is far, far from charity. Giving a nation a missile corvette is like, well, think of it like giving someone a highly complex proprietary mainframe computer in the 1980s.
Okay, I like this analogy.
You aren't just giving them a piece of hardware. You are forcing them to adopt your operating system, your engineers, and your logic.
Because of the maintenance.
Exactly. Think about the life cycle of a warship. It requires highly specific spare parts, specialized maintenance schedules, proprietary software updates for its radar and weapons.
And rigorous, continuous training for the crew.
Yes. By giving Vietnam the INS Kirpan, India essentially ensures that the Vietnamese Navy will have to integrate tightly with the Indian Navy and Indian defense contractors for the next 2 to 3 decades just to keep that ship afloat.
Oh, wow. So it's the ultimate ecosystem lock-in.
That's exactly what it is.
You don't just secure an alliance for the current political cycle. You structurally bind their military infrastructure to yours for an entire generation.
Precisely. The hardware forces continuous, structural engagement, and India is amplifying this ecosystem lock-in through human capital as well.
You mean the military academies?
Right. They have aggressively opened their military training institutions to Western and Afro-Asian nations.
The numbers on this are impressive. Currently, they host over 100 foreign military and defense attaches in New Delhi, while deploying over 50 of their own abroad.
And that human element is just huge.
Because when you bring a foreign military officer to your war college, you aren't just teaching them how to read a map.
No, you are immersing them in your strategic doctrine.
Right. You're teaching them how India views the world, how India plans for conflict, and you're forging personal, face-to-face relationships between the people who will be the generals and admirals of their respective countries in 20 years.
It builds a common language of security.
Yeah.
If a crisis happens a decade from now, the Indian naval chief won't be calling a complete stranger in Manila or Hanoi. He'll be calling someone he's studied with.
Which cuts through so much red tape. So when you stack all of this up right, the 75 multilateral exercises, the submarine deployments, high-stakes piracy rescues, exporting supersonic missiles, and this ecosystem lock-in through warships and academies, it just looks like an unstoppable strategic masterclass.
It really does look flawless on paper.
But if we dig deeper into the analysis, the reality is far more fractured, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because this strategy is currently hitting some massive structural roadblocks.
The strategic ambition is definitely outpacing the structural reality right now. And the most glaring friction point is India's domestic industrial base.
Right. It's a massive contradiction. We just spent all this time detailing how India is projecting power by exporting BrahMos missiles and gifting warships.
Hmm.
Yet, the foundational reality is that India still heavily relies on procuring defense systems from abroad to meet its own national security challenges.
It's an incredibly difficult transitional phase.
They are trying to act as a global arms supplier while still struggling with a limited domestic technological base.
Exactly. I mean, they have achieved excellence in a few specific high-profile systems like the BrahMos, but building a self-sufficient, comprehensive military-industrial complex takes decades of specialized manufacturing and R&D.
It doesn't happen overnight.
No. So they are walking this very precarious line of trying to project the image of a fully independent security provider while privately knowing they still need to import critical technologies to secure their own borders.
And the friction isn't just happening in the factories, right? It's in the government offices, too.
Oh, absolutely, the bureaucracy.
Our sources point out a severe institutional gap. They argue that India lacks the institutionalized mechanisms to fully leverage this military diplomacy, and that they still rely way too heavily on conventional diplomatic approaches.
Yeah, the civilian-military divide.
So how does that bureaucratic failure actually manifest in the real world? Like, give me an example.
Well, let's visualize the mechanism of that failure. Imagine that Indian Navy captain we talked about earlier.
Okay.
He pulls off a brilliant, high-stakes hostage rescue in the Red Sea. He generates massive goodwill, proves India's capability, the whole deal.
Right, he does his job perfectly.
The rescued nation is thrilled. They reach out to New Delhi to formalize a new, deep maritime security treaty based on that exact success.
Sounds like a win.
It should be. But because the civilian bureaucracy hasn't adapted, the paperwork for that treaty lands on the desk of a traditional diplomat who views the world through a 20th century lens. The proposal gets bogged down in interministerial red tape for 3 years because there is no agile, dedicated integration mechanism for defense diplomacy.
So by the time the treaty is actually ready, the geopolitical momentum is just gone.
Exactly. The military is moving at the speed of a crisis. The bureaucracy is moving at the speed of a committee.
Oh, that's perfectly put. So the frontline commanders are creating incredible diplomatic opportunities, but the institutions back home are dropping the baton.
It is a massive structural vulnerability.
And while they are trying to fix that bureaucracy, they are also walking two very dangerous diplomatic tightropes. The first, obviously, is the security dilemma with China.
Right, because every action creates a reaction.
Yeah. The entire premise of this defense diplomacy is to manage China's regional assertiveness. But by actively arming nations like the Philippines with supersonic missiles and aggressively pushing into the South China Sea with joint patrols, India risks transforming a managed competition into an active confrontation.
Actions taken purely for deterrence are almost always perceived by the adversary as offensive provocations. It's the classic spiral model.
Right. You buy a shield to protect yourself, your neighbor thinks you're preparing for a fight, so he buys a sword, which forces you to buy a bigger shield.
Precisely.
But the second tightrope is the one that really caught my attention today because it brings us back to a crucial detail we touched on earlier.
Russia.
Russia. This seems like the most painful friction point of their entire strategic pivot.
It's an immense gamble.
So India is rapidly expanding its defense attaché presence across Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
But to do that, they are actually reducing their defense attachés in key legacy locations, most notably Moscow.
Yes.
Now, earlier, you explicitly pointed out that the BrahMos missile, the crown jewel of their export strategy, is a joint venture with Russia. India's reliance on Russian military hardware is historically massive.
It is deeply entrenched.
So, if ties with Russia are that critical to their actual warfighting capability today, why on earth are they pulling their military diplomats out of Moscow?
Well, because resources, even for a rising superpower, are strictly finite.
You only have so many people.
Exactly. You only have so many highly trained, senior military diplomats who truly understand grand strategy. So what you're seeing here is the harsh mathematical reality of a geopolitical pivot.
But isn't pulling resources away from your primary hardware supplier incredibly risky?
Oh, it's a huge risk.
Yeah.
But India recognizes that the center of global geopolitical gravity has fundamentally shifted.
Towards the Pacific.
Right. The immediate existential challenges, the trade routes, the contested islands, the future of technological dominance, those are being decided in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea right now, not in Eastern Europe.
So India physically has to move its human capital to the emerging hot zones.
Even if it means alienating the old friend who helped build their current military. They're making a calculated bet.
A bet that their future security relies on building a broad, diversified network of new alliances in the Pacific, rather than remaining tethered to a single historical supplier.
Especially one whose own global position is rapidly changing. It is a necessary pivot, but the execution of it carries incredible risk.
It really paints a picture of a nation undergoing a profound, high-stakes metamorphosis.
That's exactly what it is.
Looking back at the arc of what we've unpacked today for you, the listener, we started with the sheer scale of the expansion driven by the immediate threat of a shifting balance of power. We saw how India is proving its capability not with paper, but with 75 joint exercises, complex submarine deployments, and physically stepping into the security vacuum of the Red Sea.
We also analyzed the mechanisms of their ecosystem lock-in, using advanced hardware like the BrahMos and the INS Kirpan to bind regional militaries to India's defense architecture for decades to come.
But we also pulled back the curtain on the vulnerabilities, right? The harsh reality of an underdeveloped domestic defense industry, the bureaucratic lag that threatens to squander military successes, and the incredibly delicate gamble of pivoting away from historical partners like Russia.
It is a brilliant strategy, but it is truly walking on a razor's edge.
It is the ultimate test of statecraft.
It is. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final implication to consider. And this stems directly from that bureaucratic friction we discussed earlier.
Oh, let's hear it.
So we noted that the military is currently out-innovating the civilian bureaucracy, right?
Yes, moving at the speed of a crisis.
Exactly. The Navy and the armed forces are out there on the front lines, rescuing hostages, facilitating massive technology transfers, and actively shaping regional stability, while traditional diplomatic institutions struggle to keep pace.
Right.
If that dynamic becomes permanent, we have to ask a very serious question about the future of governance. A decade from now, who will actually be driving the nation's grand strategy? Will it be the civilian diplomats in tailored suits navigating interministerial red tape? Or will the true architects of foreign policy be the generals and admirals in uniform dictating global alliances from the bridge of a guided missile destroyer?
Wow. That completely shifts the center of gravity for who actually controls a country's destiny.
He really does.
Because if the military becomes the most effective diplomatic tool you have, eventually every foreign policy problem starts to look like a nail waiting for a highly sophisticated hammer.
Precisely.
That is a brilliant and honestly slightly terrifying thought to end on. Thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. As always, we encourage you to keep questioning the narratives, keep looking at the mechanisms behind the headlines, and we'll catch you on the next one.